The rain had been falling over Ashford Falls for 3 days straight, turning the streets into rivers of mud and despair. Emma Carter sat by the window of her small apartment above the Sunrise laundromat, cradling her newborn daughter against her chest. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around Emma's thumb, and for a moment, the young mother allowed herself to believe that everything would be all right. "Lily," she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Your daddy would have loved you so much." The apartment was modest. Barely 400 square feet with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanked throughout the night, but it was home. Emma had worked double shifts at Miller's Diner right up until her water broke, saving every penny to prepare for this moment. 3 days ago, she'd given birth at Ashford Community Clinic, a small medical facility on the edge of town. The nurses had been kind, especially Nurse Rodriguez, who had stayed past her shift to make sure Emma and the baby were stable. Emma's thoughts drifted to Michael, her husband. 8 months had passed since the construction accident at the Morrison development site. 8 months since she'd gotten the call that would shatter her world. The scaffolding had collapsed, they said. 3 men didn't make it home that day. Michael Carter was 26 years old, full of dreams about the family they would build together. He never got to know that Emma was pregnant. The financial aftermath had been devastating. Michael's father, Robert Carter, had taken out multiple loans over the years to keep his small auto repair shop running. When Robert died 5 years ago from a heart attack, those debts transferred to Michael as the only heir. Emma had known about some of the loans, but not all of them. Certainly not about the paperwork buried in a safe deposit box that she'd discovered only 2 months ago. A knock at the door jolted Emma from her thoughts. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:47 p.m. Her heart rate quickened. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Mrs. Carter," a man's voice called through the door. Deep, authoritative, cold. "We need to speak with you. It's about a legal matter." Emma's arms tightened instinctively around Lily. She stood slowly, her body still aching from childbirth, and walked to the door. Through the peephole she could see 3 people: a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit, a woman with a briefcase, and Sheriff Tom Bradley in his uniform. She opened the door just enough to speak through the gap. "Can I help you?" The man in the suit smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Marcus Morrison. This is Jennifer Hayes, our family attorney. And I believe you know Sheriff Bradley. May we come in? This won't take long." Emma's blood turned cold at the name Morrison. Everyone in Ashford Falls knew the Morrison family. They owned half the town, the lumber mill, the construction company, 3 apartment complexes, and the largest farm in the county. William Morrison and his son Marcus were known for their business acumen and their ruthlessness in collecting what they believed was owed to them. "What is this about?" Emma asked, not opening the door further. "It's about a contract, Mrs. Carter," Jennifer Hayes said, her voice professionally neutral. "A loan agreement signed by Robert Carter on March 15, 2018. We have legal documentation that requires your immediate attention." Sheriff Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Emma, it's better if you let them in. This is official business." Against every instinct screaming at her to slam the door, Emma stepped back and allowed them to enter. Marcus Morrison looked around the small apartment with barely concealed disdain, his eyes lingering on the water stain in the ceiling corner and the second-hand furniture. "Please sit down, Mrs. Carter," Jennifer Hayes said, setting her briefcase on the small kitchen table. "This is a difficult matter, and we want to handle it as professionally as possible." "I'm fine standing," Emma replied, keeping Lily close. "What contract are you talking about? My father-in-law died 5 years ago." Jennifer opened her briefcase and extracted a folder thick with documents. On March 15, 2018, Robert Carter borrowed $75,000 from Morrison Financial Services. The loan was for equipment upgrades to his auto repair business. Unfortunately, the business failed to generate sufficient revenue, and Mr. Carter defaulted on the payments. The loan agreement included specific collateral clauses. Emma's mind raced. $75,000. She'd known about some debts, maybe $20,000 total, but this? "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice shaking. "What does this have to do with me? Michael tried to pay down his father's debts. We've been sending payments." "The payments you've been making," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharp, "have been going toward the interest only. The principal remains untouched. With accumulated interest over 7 years, the current amount owed is now $132,000. The room seemed to spin. Emma reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. "That's impossible. I don't have that kind of money. Michael's life insurance barely covered his funeral expenses. I work at a diner. I can't." "Which is why we're here to collect on the collateral," Jennifer said, pulling out a specific document and placing it on the table. "This is page 7 of the original loan agreement signed by Robert Carter and witnessed by a notary public. Please read section 4B. Emma's hands trembled as she picked up the document. The legal language was dense, deliberately confusing, but as her eyes scanned the page, certain words jumped out at her: future progeny, firstborn child, full custody transfer, legal settlement of debt. "No," Emma whispered. the paper slipping from her fingers. No, this can't be real. I assure you it's completely legal, Jennifer said. In the state of Virginia, collateral agreements of this nature, while unusual, are enforceable when properly documented and notarized. Your father-in-law signed away the rights to his future grandchild as collateral for this loan. That's insane. Emma's voice rose, causing Lily to stir and whimper. You can't take a baby as payment for a debt. This is America, not some medieval kingdom. Sheriff, tell them this is crazy. Sheriff Bradley looked away, his jaw tight. Emma, I've reviewed the documents with the county attorney. It's technically legal. I'm sorry. Marcus Morrison stepped forward, his presence dominating the small space. Mrs. Carter, we're not monsters. The child will be well cared for. We have a nurse ready to provide proper care, better than what you could offer in these circumstances. In fact, we're doing the child a favor. Growing up in the Morrison household will provide opportunities you could never give her. Her name is Lily, Emma shouted, tears streaming down her face. She's 3 days old. She's my daughter. You can't do this. We can, and we will, Marcus replied coldly. Jennifer, proceed with the transfer. What happened next would replay in Emma's nightmares for months to come. Jennifer Hayes pulled out additional paperwork, including what she called a temporary custody transfer order, signed by Judge Harold Morrison, Marcus's uncle. Sheriff Bradley stood by the door, blocking any escape, though Emma could see the shame in his eyes. Please, Emma begged, backing away until she hit the wall. Please don't do this. She needs her mother. I'll pay the debt. I'll work 3 jobs. I'll do anything. Please. The debt is due now, Mrs. Carter, Marcus said, gesturing to Jennifer. Hand over the child. No, you'll have to take her from me. Emma clutched Lily tighter, the baby now crying loudly, sensing her mother's distress. Marcus nodded to Jennifer, who stepped forward with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Carter, if you resist, we'll have to involve Child Protective Services and claim you're creating a dangerous situation for the infant. That will go on your permanent record and could affect any future custody hearings. Is that what you want? The threat hung in the air like poison. Emma looked desperately at Sheriff Bradley. Tom, you've known me since I was in high school. You know I'm a good person. Please don't let them do this. The sheriff's face was pale, his fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing. Emma's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, sobbing. Jennifer Hayes knelt beside her, her voice softer now but no less insistent. Mrs. Carter, please, don't make this harder than it has to be. Think about what's best for Lily. The fight drained out of Emma like water through a sieve. With shaking hands, she kissed her daughter's forehead one last time, breathing in that perfect newborn smell, memorizing the weight of her in her arms. I love you, she whispered. Mommy loves you so much. I'll get you back, I promise. Jennifer Hayes took Lily from Emma's arms. The baby's cries intensified, and Emma's did too, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to fill every corner of the apartment. Marcus Morrison took the infant carrier Emma had prepared, the one with the pink blanket she'd spent hours choosing, and placed Lily inside with disturbing casualness. You'll receive documentation of the debt settlement within 5 business days, Jennifer said, gathering her papers. The child will be registered under Morrison guardianship. Should you wish to contest this arrangement, you have the right to legal representation, though I should warn you that fighting the Morrison family in court typically results in unfavorable outcomes. They left quickly after that, taking with them the only light in Emma's life. Sheriff Bradley was the last to leave, pausing at the door. Emma, I'm sorry, I truly am, but the Morrison family, they own this town. There's nothing anyone can do. Then he was gone, and Emma was alone. She stayed on the floor for hours as the gray afternoon faded to evening. The rain continued to fall, matching the tears that wouldn't stop flowing. Around her, the apartment still held signs of Lily's brief presence, the bassinet in the corner, the stack of diapers, the tiny clothes folded neatly on the dresser. Emma had imagined so many moments in this space. First smiles, middle-of-the-night feedings, lullabies sung in the soft lamplight. Now there was only silence and absence. As darkness fell completely, Emma finally pulled herself up, her body moving on autopilot. She walked to the window and stared out at the rain-soaked street below. Ashford Falls had always been a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where people looked out for each other, or so she'd thought. Now she saw it differently. A town held in the grip of fear where justice bowed to money and power. Her phone buzzed with a text from her manager at the diner. Heard what happened. Take time off. So sorry. News traveled fast in small towns. By morning, everyone would know that Emma Carter had lost her baby to the Morrisons. Some would pity her. Most would say nothing, too afraid of becoming the next target. That was how the Morrison family maintained control, through fear and the knowledge that they could take anything they wanted, even your children. Emma's grief began to harden into something else, a cold, desperate determination. She would get Lily back. She didn't know how, didn't have the money for a lawyer or the connections to fight people as powerful as the Morrisons, but she was Lily's mother, and that meant something. It had to mean something. She pulled out her laptop and began searching for legal aid organizations for anyone who might help her. The search felt hopeless. Every local attorney was either on the Morrison payroll or too scared to go against them. But she kept looking, kept fighting the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Ashford Falls, washing the streets clean but unable to wash away the injustice that had taken root in the town's foundations. And somewhere across town, in a mansion on the hill, Emma's 3-day-old daughter cried for a mother who couldn't reach her. But in the distance, unnoticed by Emma or anyone else, a pair of headlights cut through the rain. A black SUV with military plates was entering the town limits, carrying someone who had been away for a very long time. Someone who was about to learn that home was not the place he remembered, and that some battles were just beginning. The black SUV rolled through Ashford Falls at dawn, its windshield wipers fighting against the persistent rain that had plagued the town for days. Behind the wheel, Captain James Whitmore, though he'd always be the Duke to the locals, barely recognized the main street he'd grown up on. 4 years of military service in overseas conflict zones had changed him, but the town had changed too, and not for the better. James was 32 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered face that came from too many nights sleeping in desert sand and too many days making life or death decisions. His dark hair was shorter than military regulation now, and the uniform had been replaced by civilian clothes, jeans, a navy Henley, and a worn leather jacket. But the soldier's posture remained, straight-backed, alert, always scanning for threats. The nickname Duke had started as a joke in high school. The Whitmore family had founded Ashford Falls in 1847, and for generations they'd been the town's most prominent citizens. James's great-great-grandfather had built the original lumber mill. His grandfather had served as mayor for 20 years. The Whitmore estate, a sprawling colonial-style mansion on 15 acres at the edge of town, had been the social center of the community for over a century. But James had never wanted any of that. He'd joined the Army right after college, driven by a desire to serve something bigger than himself, to prove his worth through action rather than inheritance. His father, Richard Whitmore, had supported the decision, even though it meant leaving the family business in the hands of James's cousin Philip. Richard had died 18 months ago, a stroke. Sudden and merciless. James had gotten emergency leave to attend the funeral, but he'd returned to his unit within a week. There had been a mission, people depending on him. Philip had assured him the estate and family holdings would be fine. "Don't worry, cousin," Philip had said. "I'll take care of everything." Now, driving through the gray morning light, James realized that maybe he should have worried. The town looked tired, defeated. Several storefronts on Main Street were boarded up. Miller's Diner, the place where he'd eaten countless breakfasts as a kid, had a faded "Help Wanted" sign in the window. The old movie theater was completely dark, apparently closed for good. Even the park near the town square looked neglected, the benches broken and the fountain dry. James pulled up to the Whitmore estate just before 7 a.m. The iron gates stood open. They should have been closed and locked. As he drove up the long driveway, his jaw tightened. The grounds were overgrown, the hedges untrimmed, the gardens that his mother had lovingly maintained now choked with weeds. The house itself, while still imposing, showed signs of neglect, peeling paint, missing roof shingles, gutters hanging loose. Philip's Mercedes was parked near the front entrance along with 2 other expensive cars James didn't recognize. He parked the SUV and sat for a moment, processing what he was seeing. This wasn't just lack of maintenance. This was abandonment. The front door was unlocked. James entered the foyer and the smell hit him immediately. Stale cigarette smoke and alcohol. The grandfather clock his family had owned for 4 generations had stopped working. Family portraits hung crooked on the walls. In what used to be his father's study, James found Philip passed out on the leather couch, surrounded by empty bottles and overflowing ashtrays. "Philip," James's voice was sharp, commanding. "Wake up." His cousin jolted awake, blinking in confusion. Philip Whitmore was 35, with thinning hair and the soft physique of someone who'd never done a hard day's work. His eyes widened when he recognized James. "James, you're back early. I thought you weren't coming until next month. My deployment ended." "What happened here, Philip? What happened to our family's home?" Philip sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Things have been difficult, James. The economy, you know. The lumber mill isn't as profitable as it used to be. Expenses have been, where are the staff? Where's Margaret? Margaret had been the estate's housekeeper for 30 years. Had to let her go. Couldn't afford the payroll. James looked around the ruined study. At the papers scattered everywhere, the dust coating every surface. Couldn't afford it? Or you spent the money on other things? Philip stood defensively. "You don't understand what it's been like. The Morrisons..." They've been taking over everything. William Morrison made me an offer on the mill and You sold the family mill? James's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. The mill my great-great-grandfather built? I didn't have a choice. They were undercutting our prices, stealing our contracts. It was sell or watch it go bankrupt. James stepped closer, and Philip involuntarily stepped back. You always have a choice. What else did you sell? Just some properties. The apartment building on Oak Street. The farmland near the river. James, you have to understand. Get out. What? Get out of this house. Now, you're done managing the family estate. Philip's face flushed with anger. You can't just walk in here after 4 years and, this is my house, James said, his voice cold and controlled. My father left it to me. You are acting as temporary manager. That arrangement is terminated. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and leave. Philip grabbed his jacket, muttering curses under his breath. You're making a mistake, James. The Morrisons own this town now. You can't fight them. Nobody can. After Philip left, James spent the next 2 hours walking through the estate, cataloging the damage and neglect. It was worse than he'd thought. Philip had not only sold off assets, but had taken out loans against the remaining property. The estate was drowning in debt, but it was the state of the town that truly troubled James. As he drove back into Ashford Falls around noon, he saw the Morrison name everywhere. Morrison Construction, Morrison Properties, Morrison Financial Services. It was like a cancer that had metastasized, spreading into every corner of community life. He stopped at Miller's Diner for lunch. The place was nearly empty, just an elderly couple in one booth and a tired-looking waitress behind the counter. James slid onto a stool and picked up a menu. Welcome to Miller's, the waitress said without looking up. What can I get you? Coffee black and the Turkey Club. She poured the coffee, and when she finally looked at him, her eyes widened. James Whitmore, is that really you? He smiled. Hey, Sarah, been a while. Sarah Miller had been 2 years behind him in high school. She'd married her sweetheart, took over the diner from her parents. 4 years. We heard you were overseas. Iraq, Afghanistan, both actually. Good to be home. He gestured at the empty diner. Business slow? Sarah's expression darkened. You could say that. Half the town's either working for Morrison or too broke to eat out. We're barely hanging on. She lowered her voice. Your cousin Philip didn't help things, selling everything to them. I heard. I'm trying to figure out what happened while I was gone. As Sarah prepared his sandwich, James overheard the elderly couple in the booth talking in hushed tones. Did you hear about Emma Carter? The woman whispered. Terrible thing, the man replied. That poor girl. First she loses Michael, now the baby. I still can't believe the Morrisons did that. Taking a child over a debt. It's barbaric. Hush, Ethel. You know better than to speak ill of them. They own half the county. James's attention sharpened. He waited until Sarah brought his sandwich. Sarah, who's Emma Carter? Sarah glanced around nervously, then leaned in. She's one of our waitresses. Good girl, works hard. Her husband died in an accident at one of Morrison's construction sites last year. She just had a baby 3 days ago. Sarah's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The Morrisons took the baby yesterday. Some old debt contract signed by her father-in-law. They say it's legal, but James, it's wrong. It's so wrong. A cold fury began to build in James's chest. They took her child? As payment for a debt? $75,000 from what I heard, plus interest. Emma could never pay it. She's been working double shifts just to afford her apartment. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She came in this morning to tell me she needed time off. James, I've never seen someone so broken. She could barely speak. James set down his coffee cup carefully. Where does she live? Above the Sunrise Laundromat on 3rd Street. But James, be careful. The Morrisons don't like people interfering in their business. And Sheriff Bradley? He's on their payroll. After finishing his meal, James sat in his SUV outside the diner, his mind working through the problem like he would a military operation. Gather intelligence, identify the enemy, find the weakness, execute with precision. But this wasn't enemy territory overseas. This was his hometown, and the enemy was hiding behind legal documents and corrupt officials. He drove to 3rd Street and parked outside the Sunrise Laundromat. The apartment entrance was around the side, accessed by a narrow staircase. James climbed the stairs and knocked on the door marked 2B. No answer. He knocked again. Mrs. Carter? My name is James Whitmore. I'd like to talk to you about your situation. A long silence, then a voice, hoarse from crying. Go away. Ma'am, I just want to help. Nobody can help. Please just leave me alone. James stood at the door, frustrated. He wasn't used to being unable to fix problems. In the military, there was always a solution, always a way to complete the mission. But here, standing in a dingy hallway, he felt powerless. He slid a business card under the door. It had his cell phone number. My number's on the card. If you need anything, call me, I mean it. As he turned to leave, the door opened, just a crack. Emma Carter looked even younger than he'd expected, maybe mid-20s, with long brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. She wore sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. James met her gaze. "Because what happened to you is wrong, and because I spent 4 years fighting for people's freedom, and I didn't come home to find my town ruled by thugs in expensive suits." Emma studied him for a long moment. "You're Richard Whitmore's son. I heard you were in the army. Just got back yesterday. I'm still trying to understand what Ashford Falls has become. It's become a place where money is the only thing that matters." Emma's voice was bitter. "The Morrisons own everything. The sheriff, the judge, the banks. They took my baby, Mr. Whitmore. They took my 3-day-old daughter because of a debt I didn't even know existed." "Tell me everything," James said. "Please." Emma hesitated, then opened the door wider. The apartment was small and sparse, but clean. James noticed the empty bassinet in the corner, the baby clothes still folded on a chair. His jaw tightened. Over the next hour, Emma told him the entire story. She showed him the loan documents, explained about her husband's death, described in painful detail how Marcus Morrison and his attorney had taken Lily from her arms. James listened without interrupting, his military training allowing him to remain calm even as anger burned in his gut. "Have you tried calling a lawyer?" he asked when she finished. "I can't afford one. I called legal aid in Richmond, but they said it could take months to get an appointment, and by then," her voice broke, "by then, who knows what will happen to Lily." James pulled out his phone and photographed every page of the loan document. "Mrs. Carter, Emma, please. Emma, I'm going to look into this. I have some resources, people I can call, but I need you to trust me. Why would you help me? You don't even know me." James thought about the soldiers he'd served with, the civilians he'd protected in war zones, the principles his father had taught him about duty and honor. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because the Morrisons are about to learn that not everyone in this town is afraid of them." After leaving Emma's apartment, James drove to the Morrison estate on the north side of town. It was even larger than the Whitmore estate, deliberately ostentatious, with marble columns and gold-trimmed fixtures visible through the massive windows. He parked in the circular driveway and rang the doorbell. A butler answered. "Can I help you?" "James Whitmore to see Marcus Morrison. Tell him it's about the Carter matter." 5 minutes later, James was shown into a study that looked like it belonged in a palace. Marcus Morrison stood behind a desk of dark wood, flanked by 2 large men in suits, private security. Marcus was in his mid-40s, with slicked-back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Captain Whitmore," Marcus said. "Welcome home. I was sorry to hear about your father. He was a good man." "Was he?" James replied coldly. "Because I'm hearing he made a deal with you before he died. A deal that resulted in my cousin selling off family assets." Marcus's smile didn't falter. "Business, James. Your father understood that. Perhaps you will too, now that you're home. I'm not here about business. I'm here about Emma Carter and her baby." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marcus's smile finally disappeared. "That matter is settled. A legal contract, properly executed. Not your concern. I'm making it my concern. That would be unwise." Marcus walked around the desk. "You've been away a long time, Captain. You don't understand how things work here now. Ashford Falls has prospered under Morrison leadership. We've brought jobs, investments, stability, but that stability requires order. It requires respect for contracts and agreements. It requires fear," James corrected. "You've turned this town into your personal fiefdom." Strong words from someone who just returned. "Tell me, Captain, how many combat deployments did you complete? 3? 4? You must have seen what happens when there's no strong leadership, no structure. I provide that structure." James stepped closer, and the 2 security men tensed. "In the military, we have rules of engagement. We have honor. What you did to Emma Carter, taking a baby from its mother, that's not leadership. That's cruelty." Marcus's eyes hardened. "The contract is legal. Judge Morrison reviewed it personally." "Your uncle, you mean? How convenient." "Be very careful, Captain. You're a war hero, yes, people respect that, but respect only goes so far. If you interfere in Morrison business, you'll find that your family name doesn't protect you anymore. Philip learned that lesson. Perhaps you need to learn it too." James held Marcus's gaze for a long moment. "I learned a lot of lessons overseas, Morrison. One of them is that bullies always fall eventually. The bigger they are, the harder they fall." He turned and walked out, feeling the eyes of Morrison's security following him all the way to the door. As he drove back toward the Whitmore estate, James's phone rang. It was an old friend from his military unit, now working as a lawyer in Richmond. "James, got your message. What's this about a debt collection case?" "It's complicated, Marcus. I just sent you some documents. I need to know if this contract is actually enforceable. Give me an hour. I'll call you back. The call came 90 minutes later. James was sitting in his father's study, his study now, trying to organize the financial chaos Philip had left behind. James, I reviewed the documents. This is one of the most predatory contracts I've ever seen. It's technically legal. Virginia law allows for unconventional collateral agreements if properly notarized, but morally, it's reprehensible. Can we fight it? Maybe, but you'd need a judge willing to look past the letter of the law and consider the spirit of it. And from what you've told me about this Judge Morrison, he's Marcus Morrison's uncle, completely compromised. Then you'd need to take it to a higher court. That takes time and money. Months, probably. Maybe a year. James's hand tightened on the phone. That baby doesn't have months, Marcus. The Morrisons could legally adopt her out, move her out of state. We need something faster. Then you need leverage, something that makes the Morrisons want to settle rather than fight. James, be careful with these people. They sound dangerous. After hanging up, James sat in silence, thinking. He'd faced down armed combatants, navigated political minefields in conflict zones, led soldiers through impossible situations. But this felt different. This was home, and home was supposed to be safe. He thought about Emma Carter's face, the devastation in her eyes. He thought about baby Lily, 3 days old, taken from her mother. And he thought about his father, who had always taught him that power came with responsibility, that those who had much were obligated to protect those who had little. James opened his laptop and began making calls. He contacted former military colleagues, reached out to investigative journalists he'd worked with overseas, called in favors from people who owed him. By midnight, he had the beginnings of a plan. The Morrisons thought they owned Ashford Falls. They thought they were untouchable. They were about to learn otherwise. 3 days had passed since James Whitmore's confrontation with Marcus Morrison, and the response had been swift and calculated. The local bank that held the Whitmore estate's mortgage suddenly demanded immediate payment on overdue loans James hadn't known existed. 2 business contracts his family had maintained for decades were abruptly canceled, and someone had spray-painted "Go Home" across the front gate of the estate. James stood in his father's study, now his war room, surrounded by documents, photographs, and notes covering every surface. His laptop displayed multiple browser tabs: Virginia state law, debt collection regulations, adoption procedures, and background information on the Morrison family. The more he dug, the uglier the picture became. The Morrison empire wasn't built on legitimate business practices. It was built on exploitation, manipulation, and fear. Over the past 15 years, at least 7 families had been forced into predatory contracts similar to Emma's. Some had lost their homes. Others had been forced into what amounted to indentured servitude, working Morrison properties to pay off debts that never seemed to decrease. But the legal system protected them. Judge Harold Morrison rubber-stamped every contract. Sheriff Tom Bradley looked the other way. The county prosecutor, David Chen, had tried to investigate 3 years ago and found himself suddenly facing ethics charges that derailed his career. The message was clear: cross the Morrisons, and you'll pay. James was reviewing bank records when his phone rang. Unknown number. This is Whitmore. Captain Whitmore? A woman's voice. Elderly, but strong. My name is Martha Reynolds. I taught history at Ashford Falls High School for 32 years. I understand you're asking questions about the Morrison family. James sat up straighter. Yes, ma'am. Do you have information? I have more than information. I have documentation, but not over the phone. Can you meet me at St. Michael's Church on Maple Street in 1 hour? Come alone. The line went dead. St. Michael's was a small Presbyterian church on the quiet side of town, its white steeple visible from blocks away. James arrived early and waited in the empty parking lot, his military training making him scan for potential threats. At precisely 2 p.m., an older woman emerged from a green Honda Civic. She was in her 70s, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp blue eyes that assessed James carefully. Mrs. Reynolds, Martha, please. Let's walk in the cemetery. More private. They walked among the weathered headstones, the afternoon sun finally breaking through the clouds that had covered Ashford Falls for over a week. Martha moved slowly but with purpose, her cane tapping against the gravel path. My grandson was named Christopher, she began without preamble. Bright boy, full of potential. His father, my son David, took out a loan from Morrison Financial Services 8 years ago to expand his veterinary practice. The practice failed during the recession. David tried to negotiate with the Morrisons, but they weren't interested in negotiation. She stopped at a grave marker. Christopher Reynolds, 2005-2019. Christopher was 14 when they came for him. Different mechanism than what they used on Emma Carter, but the same principle. The contract stated that if my son couldn't pay, the family would provide labor to Morrison Properties until the debt was satisfied. Christopher was assigned to work at their lumber mill after school and on weekends. Dangerous work for a child. James felt his chest tighten. What happened? Equipment malfunction. That's what the official report said. Christopher was operating a saw he'd been trained on for only 2 days. He died instantly. Presently, Martha's voice remained steady, but James saw her hands trembling on the cane. The Morrisons paid for the funeral, sent flowers, settled the debt, and then they made it very clear that if we pursued any legal action, my son would lose everything, his home, his practice, everything. So we stayed silent. Mrs. Reynolds, Martha, I'm so sorry. She turned to face him directly. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Captain. I'm telling you because you're the first person in 8 years with both the resources and the courage to stand up to them. I've been collecting evidence since Christopher died. Contracts, testimonies from other victims, financial records. I want you to have it. She handed him a thick manila envelope. There are 6 other families in there. Some left town, some are still here, too scared to speak up, but they all have stories. The Morrisons have been running this operation for over 15 years. Why didn't anyone go to the state police, the FBI? Martha's laugh was bitter. We tried. 5 years ago, a group of us filed complaints with the state attorney general's office. The investigation was assigned to someone who, we later discovered, went to law school with Marcus Morrison. The case was quietly closed due to insufficient evidence. That's when we realized how deep this goes. James opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of contracts, sworn statements, financial records, a paper trail of systematic exploitation. This is incredible, Martha. This could be exactly what we need. There's something else, she said. Your father knew about the Morrisons. About 15 years ago, Richard Whitmore and William Morrison, Marcus's father, had a major falling out. I don't know all the details, but it had something to do with business practices. Your father refused to partner with them on several ventures. William Morrison never forgave him for that. When your father died and Philip took over, the Morrisons finally got their chance to absorb the Whitmore assets. Philip was just a pawn, a willing pawn. He's weak and they knew it. But you, Martha studied James's face. You're different. You're your father's son in the ways that matter. That's why I'm trusting you with this. As they walked back toward the parking lot, James noticed a young man leaning against a beat-up Toyota, camera in hand. He was in his late 20s with messy dark hair and glasses, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt. Who's that? James asked. Martha smiled for the first time. That's David Park, investigative journalist from Richmond. He's been trying to write a story about the Morrisons for 2 years, but no publication will touch it. Too afraid of lawsuits. David, come meet Captain Whitmore. David approached with an eager energy, extending his hand. Captain, I've been following your family's story. When I heard you were back and asking questions about Emma Carter, I drove straight here. I think we can help each other. Over coffee at a small cafe on the edge of town, David laid out his research. He'd interviewed former Morrison employees, tracked shell companies used to hide assets, and documented a pattern of exploitation that went back nearly 2 decades. But without a major publication willing to back him, the story remained unpublished. I need someone credible to go on record, David explained. Someone the Morrisons can't intimidate or discredit. Martha agreed to speak, but we need more. We need Emma Carter's story. We need documentation, and we need to prove that this isn't just one bad contract, it's a pattern. I can provide documentation, James said, thinking of Martha's envelope and his own research. But Emma, she's barely holding together. I don't know if she's ready to go public. We may not have a choice, David said grimly. I've been monitoring court filings. The Morrisons filed paperwork yesterday to begin formal adoption proceedings for Emma's baby. They're moving fast, probably because they know you're digging. If we don't act soon, that baby could be permanently placed with another family. James's jaw tightened. How fast is fast? Based on the expedited timeline they're requesting, 72 hours. Maybe less if Judge Morrison approves it, which he will. 3 days. They had 3 days to build a case strong enough to stop the adoption and expose the Morrisons. It felt impossible. James's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Teresa Gonzalez. I'm the nurse taking care of Lily. We need to talk. Urgent. An hour later, James met Teresa in the parking lot of Ashford Community Clinic where she worked. She was in her early 30s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet strength. She looked exhausted and frightened. I shouldn't be doing this, Teresa said, glancing around nervously. I could lose my license, but what they're doing to that baby, I can't be silent anymore. Tell me everything, James said. I was hired by the Morrisons 3 days ago to provide round-the-clock care for Lily at their estate. The money was too good to refuse. I have student loans, and work is hard to find around here. But when I got there and learned the full story, Teresa's voice shook. Captain Whitmore, they're not keeping that baby because they care about her. Marcus Morrison has already been in contact with a couple from California. Wealthy, connected. They're willing to pay $200,000 for a private adoption. James felt sick. They're selling her. It's disguised as legal fees and compensation for care, but yes, that's exactly what it is. And it gets worse. I overheard Marcus on the phone yesterday. He was laughing about it, saying this was the most profitable debt collection yet. He called Emma Carter. I can't even repeat what he called her. When is the California couple arriving? They're flying in tomorrow night. Marcus wants to complete the adoption paperwork the next morning and have them gone by noon. He's worried about you, Captain. He knows you're investigating. James thought quickly. Can you get Emma in to see her baby? Just once? Teresa bit her lip. I could lose everything. I know. I'm not asking lightly, but Emma is breaking apart. She needs to see that Lily is okay, and Lily needs her mother's presence even briefly. After a long moment, Teresa nodded. Tonight, the Morrisons are hosting a dinner party until at least midnight. I'll be alone with Lily in the nursery. Come to the service entrance at the back of the property at 10 p.m. But Captain, this is a one-time thing. I can't risk it again. That evening, James picked up Emma from her apartment. She'd lost weight in just a few days, her clothes hanging loose. But when he told her she'd get to see Lily, life sparked back into her eyes. Really? I can see her? For a few minutes. We have to be careful. They drove to the Morrison estate through darkness, parking a quarter-mile away and approaching on foot. The main house blazed with lights and voices from the dinner party. James and Emma circled around to the back, where Teresa waited at the service entrance, holding Lily wrapped in a pink blanket. Emma's breath caught. For a moment she couldn't move. Then Teresa placed the baby in her arms and Emma collapsed against the wall, sobbing quietly as she held her daughter for the first time in days. She's okay, Teresa whispered. She's healthy, eating well. I've been taking good care of her. Thank you, Emma managed through tears. Thank you so much. James watched through the window as Emma held Lily close, whispering to her, kissing her forehead. The baby seemed to recognize her mother's voice, settling calmly against her chest. It was a moment of pure love in the midst of terrible circumstances. 10 minutes later, Teresa had to take Lily back inside. Emma held on for one more second, then reluctantly handed over her daughter. I love you, baby girl, she whispered. Mommy's fighting for you, I promise. On the drive back, Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'll do it. Whatever you need. Interviews, going public. Whatever, I'll do it, because if I don't fight now, I'll never forgive myself. The next morning, James, Emma, Martha, David, and Teresa met at the Whitmore estate. They spread out all the documentation across the dining room table: contracts, testimonies, financial records, photographs. David set up his camera equipment. We're going to record everything, David explained. Full interviews, all on camera. Then I'm uploading it to every platform I can find: YouTube, social media, news sites. The Morrisons can't suppress all of it. They'll sue, Martha warned. They'll come after all of us. Let them, James said. I've got resources they don't know about. Military connections, colleagues in the Department of Justice, contacts in national media. Once this story breaks, it'll be too big to contain. They spent 4 hours recording. Emma told her story, breaking down multiple times but pushing through. Martha spoke about Christopher. Teresa, her voice shaking, detailed the planned adoption sale. James provided analysis of the documents, explaining how the Morrisons had exploited legal loopholes for years. David was editing the footage when James's phone rang. It was Philip, his cousin, sounding panicked. James, I heard you're investigating the Morrisons. You need to stop. They're furious. Marcus called me, threatening. I don't care what Marcus threatened. They know about your meeting with the nurse. They know about the journalist. James, they're escalating. They've already filed papers to accelerate the adoption. Judge Morrison signed off this morning. The California couple arrives tonight. The adoption is finalized tomorrow at 9 a.m. After that, it's over. The baby will be gone. James looked at his watch. 6:47 p.m. Less than 15 hours. After hanging up, James addressed the group. We're out of time. David, how fast can you get that video published? Give me 2 hours. But James, even if it goes viral, it might not be fast enough to stop a legal adoption that's happening tomorrow morning. James pulled out his phone and made a call he'd been saving. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Colonel Bradley. Sir, this is Captain Whitmore. I'm calling in that favor you owe me. Colonel Bradley had been James's commanding officer, now working in the Virginia Attorney General's office. James had saved his life during an ambush in Afghanistan. What do you need, Whitmore? I need the Attorney General's office to open an emergency investigation into corruption and human trafficking in Ashford Falls, Virginia, tonight. And I need someone with authority to stop an illegal adoption scheduled for tomorrow morning. That's a big ask, Captain. I'm sending you documentation right now. Sir, I wouldn't call if it wasn't critical. There was a pause. Send everything you have. If it's what you say it is, I'll wake up the Attorney General personally. As James sent files from his laptop, Teresa's phone buzzed. Her face went pale. They know. Marcus Morrison knows I helped you. He just fired me and threatened to report me to the nursing board. And there are 2 men in a car outside my apartment. Pack a bag, James said immediately. You're staying here at the estate. All of you. It's not safe for anyone to be alone tonight. At 8:15 p.m., David's video went live across multiple platforms. Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. Within 2 hours, 50,000. Local news picked it up, then regional. By 11 p.m., it was trending nationally. The phone at the Whitmore estate started ringing constantly. Reporters, supporters, threats. James disconnected it. At midnight, James stood watch at the front window while the others tried to sleep in the guest rooms. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've made a serious mistake, Captain. This will not end well for you or anyone helping you." James replied, "Neither will it end well for you. The whole world is watching now." At 2:17 a.m., James's phone rang. "Colonel Bradley. Whitmore, the Attorney General is livid. We've been reviewing your documents for the past 5 hours. This is worse than we thought. I've got state police en route to Ashford Falls right now, along with investigators from our office. We're also notifying the FBI about the potential trafficking situation. The adoption is scheduled for 9 a.m. Not anymore. The Attorney General is issuing an emergency injunction at 6 a.m., freezing all Morrison adoption proceedings pending investigation. Judge Harold Morrison is also being suspended from the bench effective immediately for conflict of interest." James felt tension he'd been carrying for days finally release. "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. This is about to get ugly. The Morrisons have powerful friends, but you did good, Whitmore. You did real good." At 6:30 a.m., James woke everyone with the news. Emma burst into tears of relief. Martha smiled for the first time in what looked like years. David was already on his laptop, watching his video pass 2 million views. "We did it," Teresa said softly. "We actually did it. We're not done yet," James cautioned. "The investigation is just beginning, but we've stopped the adoption. That's the important thing." At 7:45 a.m., state police vehicles began arriving in Ashford Falls. By 8:30, investigators were at the Morrison estate with a warrant. The California couple, who had arrived the previous night, were being questioned at the local hotel. Emma stood at the window of the Whitmore estate, watching the dawn break over the town. James stood beside her. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we finish this," James said. "We make sure the Morrisons face justice. We get Lily back where she belongs. And we rebuild this town the right way." Emma looked at him, tears in her eyes but also hope. "Thank you, James, for believing me, for fighting when everyone else was too afraid." "That's what we do," James said simply. "We fight for what's right." By noon, Marcus Morrison had been taken into custody for questioning. His father, William Morrison, had been served with subpoenas. Sheriff Tom Bradley was suspended from duty. And at the Morrison estate, Teresa was gathering baby Lily's things while Emma waited in a state vehicle, about to be reunited with her daughter under protective supervision pending the investigation's outcome. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, there was real hope. And James Whitmore knew that the hardest part was still to come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of Ashford Falls County Courthouse, as news vans from Richmond, Washington, D.C., and even national networks lined the street. What had started as a local story had exploded into a national conversation about debt exploitation, corruption, and the vulnerability of ordinary families against powerful interests. James Whitmore stood on the courthouse steps beside Emma Carter, who held baby Lily close against her chest. The reunion 48 hours earlier had been captured by cameras, Emma collapsing to her knees as Teresa placed Lily in her arms, the baby's tiny fist curling around her mother's finger, both of them crying while state investigators documented everything for evidence. Now, 2 weeks after that emotional moment, they were here for the preliminary hearing that would determine if the Morrison family would face criminal charges. "You ready?" James asked Emma quietly. She adjusted Lily's blanket, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. "I'm ready. Let's finish this." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The gallery was packed with reporters, townspeople, and victims who had finally found the courage to come forward. Martha Reynolds sat in the front row, her cane resting against the bench. David Park had his laptop open, live streaming the proceedings. Teresa Gonzalez sat beside Emma, having taken a leave from her nursing job to help care for Lily and support Emma through the legal process. On the other side of the aisle, the Morrison family sat with an army of expensive attorneys. Marcus Morrison, out on bail, looked defiant. His father, William Morrison, appeared older than his 68 years, his legendary confidence visibly shaken. Their lead attorney, Gerald Hutchins, from a prominent Richmond firm, was already shuffling papers aggressively. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided over the hearing. She'd been assigned by the state after Judge Harold Morrison's immediate suspension and subsequent resignation. Judge Hendricks had a reputation for being tough, fair, and completely intolerant of corruption. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. "This court will come to order," she announced, her voice carrying authority. "We are here for preliminary hearings in multiple cases against William Morrison, Marcus Morrison, and associated entities. The charges are extensive: fraud, extortion, corruption of public officials, conspiracy and violations of adoption and child welfare laws. Assistant State Attorney Rebecca Torres stood, an African-American woman in her 40s with 15 years of prosecuting white-collar crime. Your Honor, the Commonwealth has compiled overwhelming evidence of a systematic pattern of exploitation spanning nearly 2 decades. We have documentation of predatory lending practices, illegal contract provisions, intimidation of witnesses, and the corruption of multiple public officials. Gerald Hutchins rose immediately. Your Honor, these accusations are based on misinterpretations of legitimate business contracts. The Morrison family has operated within the bounds of Virginia law for generations. This is nothing more than a media-driven persecution of successful business people. Mr. Hutchins, Judge Hendricks said coldly, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. If this is what you consider legitimate business, we're going to have a very long day. Ms. Torres, call your first witness. Over the next 4 hours, the prosecution built its case methodically. Financial experts testified about the predatory nature of Morrison Financial Services loan structures, interest rates designed to be unpayable, hidden clauses that trapped borrowers in endless debt cycles, and collateral provisions that violated both the spirit and letter of consumer protection laws. A forensic accountant traced money flows that revealed the Morrisons had been using their debt collection operation as a front for what amounted to human trafficking. Children and vulnerable individuals were being placed with wealthy families in exchange for substantial payments disguised as adoption fees and legal costs. Your Honor, the accountant testified, we've identified at least 11 transactions over the past 8 years where children taken as debt collateral were subsequently placed with out-of-state families. The Morrison family received payments ranging from $150,000 to $300,000 per transaction. The money was laundered through various shell companies and offshore accounts. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Emma held Lily tighter, tears streaming down her face as she realized how close her daughter had come to disappearing forever. When the prosecution called Emma to testify, James squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. You've got this. Just tell the truth. Emma handed Lily to Teresa and walked to the witness stand, her legs shaking. She was sworn in, and Rebecca Torres approached with a gentle expression. Mrs. Carter, please tell the court what happened on the afternoon of October 15th. Emma's voice was quiet at first but grew stronger as she spoke. She described the days after Lily's birth, the unexpected arrival of Marcus Morrison and his attorney, the contract she'd never seen before. I begged them not to take her, Emma said, her voice breaking. She was 3 days old. She needed her mother, but they didn't care. Mr. Morrison stood in my apartment and told me I should be grateful, that growing up with the Morrison family would be better for Lily than growing up with me. And how did that make you feel? Torres asked. Like I was nothing. Like my love for my daughter didn't matter because I didn't have money or power. Like the law was designed to protect people like them and hurt people like me. Gerald Hutchins's cross-examination was aggressive. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that your father-in-law signed a legal contract? A contract I didn't know existed. A contract that used my unborn child as collateral. But a legal contract nonetheless. And isn't it also true that you were unable to pay the debt? Because the debt was designed to be impossible to pay. Emma's composure cracked. The interest rates were outrageous. My husband died working for the Morrison family, and instead of helping us, they took my baby. Your Honor, Hutchins protested. The witness is being emotional and unresponsive. The witness, Judge Hendricks interrupted icily, just had her newborn baby taken from her arms. I'd say emotion is entirely appropriate. Continue, Mrs. Carter. Martha Reynolds testified next, describing in heartbreaking detail how her grandson Christopher had died in a Morrison lumber mill. He was 14 years old, Martha said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. He should have been playing baseball and doing homework. Instead, he was operating dangerous machinery to pay off a debt that wasn't even his. And when he died, the Morrisons made it very clear that if we fought back, they would destroy what was left of our family. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Torres asked gently. Because I was afraid. Because everyone in this town knew that crossing the Morrison family meant losing everything. It took Captain Whitmore's courage to make me remember that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. David Park presented his investigative findings, 2 years of research documenting the Morrison pattern of exploitation. He'd identified 7 families who had lost children through debt contracts, 14 families who had lost their homes, and 32 individuals who had been forced into labor arrangements to pay off debts that never decreased no matter how much they paid. The Morrison operation was sophisticated, David testified. They used legal loopholes, intimidation, and control of local officials to create what was essentially a modern system of debt bondage. They targeted vulnerable people, widows, single parents, people who had lost jobs or faced medical emergencies, and they did it all behind a veneer of legitimate business. Teresa Gonzalez testified about what she'd witnessed inside the Morrison estate, including the planned sale of Lily to the California couple. Her testimony was damning. Recorded phone conversations. Virginia is a one-party consent state, and Teresa had recorded everything once she realized what was happening. Emails discussing payment arrangements, and her first-hand observations of Marcus Morrison's callous attitude toward the children in his custody. He called them inventory, Teresa said, her voice shaking with anger. That's the word he used. These were babies, children, human beings, and he called them inventory. When James was called to testify, he described what he'd found upon returning to Ashford Falls, a town held hostage by fear, a corrupted legal system, and a systematic pattern of exploitation that had been allowed to continue for years, because no one had the resources or courage to fight back. Your Honor, James said, his military bearing evident, I served 4 years defending American values overseas. I saw what happens in countries where power isn't checked, where the wealthy can prey on the vulnerable without consequence. I didn't expect to come home and find the same thing happening in my own town. This isn't just about one family or one debt. It's about whether we're going to allow this kind of systematic exploitation to continue, or whether we're going to stand up and say that in America, justice means something. The defense tried to paint James as a meddling outsider who didn't understand local business practices, but Gerald Hutchins made a critical mistake during cross-examination. Captain Whitmore, isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta against the Morrison family because they acquired some of your family's assets? No, James replied calmly. I have a moral objection to people who take babies from their mothers. I have a problem with corruption and exploitation, and I have a responsibility, as someone with resources and privilege, to use those advantages to protect people who can't protect themselves. That's not a vendetta. That's basic human decency. The courtroom erupted in applause, which Judge Hendricks quickly silenced with her gavel. But the point had been made. The most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Hayes, the attorney who had helped Marcus Morrison take Lily from Emma, appeared as a prosecution witness. She'd been offered immunity in exchange for her testimony. I knew what we were doing was wrong, Jennifer said, unable to meet anyone's eyes, but the Morrison family paid extremely well, and they made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, my career was over. I rationalized it by telling myself it was all technically legal, but watching Mrs. Carter's face when we took her baby, her voice broke. I'll never forget that. I'll never forgive myself. Jennifer provided internal Morrison documents showing the full scope of their operation, contracts with wealthy couples seeking to adopt children through private channels, payment schedules, and communications that clearly showed the Morrisons knew exactly what they were doing and simply didn't care. By the end of the day, Gerald Hutchins's confident demeanor had crumbled. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and devastating. Judge Hendricks took less than an hour to make her ruling. I have reviewed the evidence presented today, and I am frankly appalled. The Morrison family has operated what can only be described as a criminal enterprise, using legal technicalities to exploit vulnerable people and corrupt public institutions to protect themselves. Marcus Morrison and William Morrison will be held without bail pending trial on all charges. Additionally, I am ordering the immediate seizure of all Morrison assets, pending a full accounting and restitution to victims. The courtroom erupted. Emma collapsed against James, sobbing with relief. Martha Reynolds closed her eyes and whispered what might have been a prayer. David Park was typing frantically, live streaming every moment. The Morrisons were handcuffed and led away, Marcus's face twisted with rage, William looking utterly broken. Their empire, built on exploitation and fear, had finally fallen, but Judge Hendricks wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am ordering a special investigation into corruption within the Ashford Falls legal and law enforcement systems. Sheriff Tom Bradley has already been suspended. I'm now expanding that investigation to include all public officials who may have been complicit in this operation. If you took Morrison money, if you looked the other way while children were being trafficked, if you prioritized personal gain over public duty, you will face consequences. Over the next 3 weeks, the cleanup continued. Sheriff Bradley was arrested and charged with corruption and dereliction of duty. 2 county commissioners resigned. The county prosecutor who had dropped previous investigations into the Morrisons was disbarred. Judge Harold Morrison faced judicial misconduct charges that would end his career. The FBI investigation expanded beyond Ashford Falls, identifying wealthy couples in 7 states who had essentially purchased children through the Morrison network. Several were charged. Others cooperated in exchange for leniency. 3 children were reunited with their biological families. 4 others, whose parents had died or couldn't be located, were placed with legitimate foster families while social services worked to determine the best outcomes. Emma's custody of Lily was formally restored without condition. The debt against her was declared invalid and legally erased. Additionally, She was awarded $200,000 in compensation from the seized Morrison assets, enough to secure her and Lily's future. But money wasn't what mattered most to Emma. What mattered was the moment 2 weeks after the hearing when she sat in her new apartment, a better place that James had helped her find, feeding Lily a bottle while sunshine streamed through clean windows. The nightmare was over. Her daughter was home. James visited often during those weeks. He'd stayed in Ashford Falls working to restore his family's estate and reputation while helping coordinate support for the Morrison victims. A legal aid fund had been established, providing free representation for anyone who had been exploited. A victim support group met weekly at St. Michael's Church, facilitated by Martha Reynolds, who had found new purpose in helping others heal. One afternoon, James brought lunch to Emma's apartment, sandwiches from Miller's Diner, which was experiencing a resurgence of business now that the town was no longer living in fear. "How are you doing?" he asked, watching Emma cradle Lily. "Better. Some days are still hard. I have nightmares about losing her again, but every morning I wake up and she's here and it's real. We made it." Emma looked at James, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I never properly thanked you for believing me when no one else would, for fighting when it would have been easier to walk away." "You don't need to thank me," James said. "You're the one who had the courage to testify, to go public with your story. You're the one who never gave up on Lily. We both fought, along with Martha and David and Teresa. That's how we won, by standing together." 3 months after the preliminary hearing, the criminal trials began. Marcus Morrison was convicted on 17 counts including fraud, extortion, corruption, and conspiracy. He received a 25-year sentence. William Morrison, whose health had deteriorated significantly, pled guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence of 15 years. Their financial empire was dismantled, with assets used to compensate victims and fund community recovery programs. Ashford Falls began to heal. New leadership emerged, people committed to transparency and accountability. The town held special elections for sheriff, county commissioners, and other positions that had been corrupted. Many of the winners were people who had stood up against the Morrisons. Sarah Miller became a county commissioner. David Park was hired as a watchdog journalist by the local paper, and Teresa Gonzalez started a non-profit focused on protecting vulnerable families from predatory lending. 6 months after that terrible October day when Lily had been taken, Emma stood in the town square at a community gathering organized to honor those who had fought for justice. Lily, now 9 months old and growing beautifully, sat on Emma's hip, babbling happily. James stood beside them, and between them was something new, not quite romance yet, but the beginning of something deeper than friendship, mutual respect, shared purpose, hope for the future. Martha Reynolds spoke to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying across the square. "What happened in Ashford Falls is a reminder that evil flourishes when good people stay silent, but it's also a reminder that courage is contagious. One person standing up, Emma Carter refusing to accept injustice, sparked a movement that changed everything. We lost years to fear, but we've gained something more valuable, the knowledge that we can fight back, that we can win, and that we're stronger together." The crowd applauded, and Emma felt tears on her cheeks. Not tears of grief this time, but tears of hope. James leaned close and whispered, "Your daughter is going to grow up in a better town because of what you did. That's a pretty incredible legacy." Emma looked at Lily, then at James, then at the gathered community, people who had been divided by fear, and were now united by the shared experience of fighting for justice. "It's not just my legacy," she said. "It's all of ours." As the sun set over Ashford Falls, casting golden light across the town square, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. The road ahead would have challenges. Healing took time, and rebuilding trust was hard work. But for the first time since Michael's death, since the debt collectors had come, since her world had shattered, Emma believed in the future. She believed in second chances. She believed in justice. And she believed, as she watched James playing peekaboo with Lily and making her daughter giggle with delight, that sometimes the darkest moments led to unexpected light. The battle had been won. The healing had begun. And in a small town in Virginia, a young mother and her baby were finally truly home.